My name is Emily. I'm 29 years old. I've been married to Jason for 5 years now, and to be honest, until recently I was sure that our life was almost perfect. Jason is a kind, devoted, and attentive husband. We built a house that became our common refuge, where it was always cozy and peaceful. Every day was similar to the previous one, but I always considered it a sign of stability, not routine. Everything changed when a new employee joined our company, Michael. I first noticed him at a general meeting. Tall, confident, with a slight grin on his lips, he looked like a man who always knows what he wants. Our eyes met for a few seconds, and I felt something strange inside of me. It was like a slight excitement, which I immediately pushed away, convincing myself that it was just a momentary weakness. Michael was the type of man who attracted attention with his confidence. He was always the center of attention, easily started conversations, joked, and his laughter echoed through the office. I watched him from afar, trying to keep my distance, but every time our eyes met, I felt a shiver run through my body. This feeling was new and frightening, but at the same time, attractive. One day after work, he suddenly came up to me. We both stayed late finishing the project. The others had already left, and the office was plunged into a pleasant silence. I was sitting at my desk, tired but pleased with the work I had done, when I heard his footsteps behind me. "Emily, are you still here?" His voice sounded unexpected but calm, as if we had known each other for a long time. I raised my head and met his gaze. He was standing right in front of me, with that same slight grin that has now become something of a danger signal for me. "Yes, I'm finishing my report," I replied, trying to sound as indifferent as possible. "Do you always work so hard?" His tone was slightly mocking, but not malicious. He sat down on the edge of my desk, studying me. "Well, someone has to," I joked, trying to lighten the mood. But he wasn't laughing. Instead, his gaze became more serious, and I felt the air between us become tense. "You know, I've been wanting to tell you for a long time," he began, and I froze, not knowing what to expect. "You're incredibly beautiful, Emily." These words sounded so unexpected that I was speechless for a second. I'm used to compliments from Jason, but from Michael, it was different. Something flared up inside me, and I felt my cheeks start to turn pink. "Thanks, Michael," I managed to say, looking down at my laptop. Nice to hear." "Emily," his voice became quieter, almost a whisper. "Have you ever thought about what life can be brighter?" This question took me by surprise. I looked up and met his gaze. There was something alluring in his eyes, something that made me think. I knew I shouldn't let myself go down this path, but something inside me was drawn to him. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my cool. "That life shouldn't be predictable," he smiled, and I felt my heart beat faster. "Sometimes you need to allow yourself to be a little spontaneous, don't you?" He slowly leaned towards me, and I felt his presence even more keenly. Every word, every gesture of his penetrated deeper, and I realized that I was starting to lose control. It was dangerous. I knew I should stop, but instead I said, "And how do you propose to make my life brighter, Michael?" His smile widened, and he finally pulled away, leaving me confused. "Maybe you'll find out about it next week. We're having a corporate party, remember?" He got up from my desk, straightening his shirt cuffs. "Maybe we'll discuss it there." I nodded, unable to say a word. He left, leaving me alone in the dim office. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my thoughts were spinning in my head like a mad whirlwind. What was that? What did he mean by that? When I got home, Jason was already asleep. I stood in the dark bedroom and looked at his calm face. He was so calm, confident about our future, and that night, I couldn't sleep for a long time, thinking about what awaits me at that ill-fated party and what might happen next. The corporate party turned out to be even bigger than I expected. The huge banquet hall of the hotel, which our company rented for the evening, was filled with people, cheerful conversations, and music. I tried to focus on communicating with my colleagues, but my thoughts kept returning to Michael. He's been bothering me ever since he left the office that night. Jason, as always, could not accompany me to such events. His job did not allow him to go out often, and I understood that. But this evening his absence was felt especially acutely. I knew that this evening could change a lot, and yet I couldn't stop. There was a conflict between duty and desire raging inside me, But maybe that was just an excuse for what was going to happen. When I entered the hall, Michael was already there. He stood in the center of a group of employees, smiling and communicating with them easily. But as soon as he noticed me, his gaze lingered on my face a little longer than usual, and in his eyes I saw the very spark that lit up in our office. I could feel my heart starting to beat faster. I tried to hide my excitement by pretending that I had just come to chat with colleagues. Michael and I exchanged only brief greetings, but every word, every touch of his hand on my arm at the moment of greeting felt like a touch of electricity. We both knew it was more than just an accident. The evening went on, and alcohol flowed like a river. I couldn't help but notice how Michael avoided my company, but his looks betrayed his thoughts. He didn't come near me, but I knew he was watching my every move. I could feel it all over my skin. At some point, I even began to doubt whether I needed to be here. Glancing at my watch, I decided it was time to leave. But as soon as I took a step towards the exit, Michael was there. He appeared so suddenly that I almost cried out in surprise. "Are you leaving?" His voice was quiet, but there was an unaccustomed confidence in it. "Yes, I think I should go." I tried to look indifferent, but I felt the tremor in my voice give me away. "Emily, take your time. We haven't talked much all evening." He leaned toward me a little, and his words seemed to become more personal. "Can we stay a little longer? I promise it won't be boring." I hesitated. Part of me screamed that I had to get out of here as fast as possible, that nothing good would come of it. But another part, darker and more hidden, was drawn to Michael like a magnet. In the end, I decided to stay, just to see how it all ends. "Okay," I said, trying not to look him in the eye. "Not for long." He smiled, and I noticed how his gaze softened. We moved to the bar, where he ordered us a glass of wine. The drink was unexpectedly strong, but I didn't mind. Maybe that's what helped me relax a little. "You know," he began after a couple of sips, "I always thought you were different from everyone else." "You're different, Emily. You keep to yourself, but that doesn't make you boring. Rather the opposite." "What do you mean by that?" I looked at him with mild suspicion. "I think there's something hidden in you, something that you're afraid to show the world yourself." His words were like a knife edge penetrating to the very core of my inner conflict. Maybe I'm wrong? I didn't know what to say. His words struck a chord with me. I felt as if he saw right through me, as if he knew about all my hidden thoughts and desires. But how could it be? We barely knew each other, and he was already able to read me like an open book. "You're probably thinking too much about me, Michael." I tried to laugh it off, but there was uncertainty in my voice. "Perhaps," he agreed, "but I feel that I am not mistaken. There's something wild and unpredictable about you. Maybe you just don't know how to let it out?" These words made me freeze. I felt my heart racing, and a wave of emotions rose in my chest. I knew he was playing with fire, and I was in that fire. But she couldn't stop. Michael invited me to go out on the terrace. I couldn't refuse, and we found ourselves alone under the starry sky. The cold night air was sobering, but it wasn't enough. His proximity was maddening. "Emily," his voice became even softer, almost a whisper. "Have you ever thought that life could be different? That you can live not according to the rules, but according to your desires?" "What do you mean?" I was trying to figure out where he was going. "I mean, sometimes you have to let yourself be yourself." He looked me straight in the eye, and I felt like I was losing control of the situation. "Do you want this?" I couldn't answer. There was a struggle inside me between duty and desire, between what was right and what I wanted. But his look, his words, his touch, all this broke down my last barriers. And I succumbed. Michael leaned over and kissed me gently. His lips were warm and soft, and I felt the whole world disappear around us. It was wrong, but it didn't matter at that moment. All that existed was the two of us, his touch, and the feeling that I was finally alive. After the kiss, I couldn't believe it had happened. We were standing on the terrace, surrounded by the silence of the night, and I knew that I had taken the first step towards something that would ruin my life. But there was no turning back. "Let's get out of here," he suggested, and I agreed without hesitation. We ended up at his house. Inside, everything was happening in a blur. I don't remember how we got to his apartment, how we ended up in the bedroom. It was like a dream full of passion and recklessness. I knew this moment would change everything, but I couldn't help myself. Michael has become something of an obsession for me. which is impossible to resist. I cheated on Jason that night. When it was over, I was lying on the bed, feeling a wave of awareness coming over me. I betrayed the man who loved me more than anything in the world. But despite all the guilt I felt, there was another emotion, desire, which now consumed me completely. Michael fell asleep next to me, and I stared at the ceiling, not knowing how to move on. This night was the first fall in a series of events that will completely change my life. Life seemed different after that night. Coming home to Jason was a real challenge. I felt like an actress playing a role she wasn't meant to play. Every gesture, every look, every word, everything became part of a complex performance that I had to maintain in order to preserve what we had. Jason, unsuspecting, continued to be as caring and loving as ever. He didn't ask unnecessary questions, and his trust in me was boundless. This only increased the severity of my guilt. The morning after my meeting with Michael, I returned home when Jason had already left for work. I walked into the house, trying to act like nothing had happened. But as soon as I crossed the threshold, I was overwhelmed by a wave of guilt. Everything seemed strange and cold. Looking at our shared photo on the wall made my heart ache. I closed my eyes, trying to banish thoughts of last night, but they wouldn't go away. I knew Michael was a danger, but I couldn't stop thinking about him. We didn't talk about what happened anymore, as if it was just one episode that we both decided to forget. But every time I saw him in the office, I felt the same forbidden attraction flare up inside me. At work, I tried to be as professional as possible, avoiding unnecessary glances and conversations with Michael. We exchanged only formal greetings and short phrases about work, but there was always tension between us, which seemed to be felt by everyone around. I knew that other employees might suspect something, and that made me even more careful. However, it was becoming increasingly difficult to keep from meeting Michael. I could feel this secret connection starting to consume me completely. We met in the nooks and crannies of the office, in places where no one could see us. Every kiss, every moment I spent with him seemed necessary to me, despite the pain they brought. One evening, when Jason was late at work, I met Michael again. This time we decided to meet in a cafe near the office. It was risky, but not meeting him was even more painful. We were sitting at a small table by the window. Michael was calm. It seemed that he was in complete control of the situation. On the contrary, I was nervous, not knowing how to behave in this new role for me. "You look tense, Emily," he said, watching me closely. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, I'm just tired," I replied, trying to smile. But he knew that wasn't true. His penetrating gaze was focused on my face. "Don't you regret what happened?" His voice was low, but there was a hidden tension in it. I looked at him, not knowing what to say. Of course I was sorry, but it was too hard to admit. Conflict raged inside me. I knew I had betrayed Jason, but I couldn't deny how I felt about Michael. "I don't know," I finally said. "It's all so confusing." Michael smiled slightly and reached out to touch mine. His touch was warm and soothing, but I knew it would only bring me more pain. Confusing? Or exciting? His voice was low, almost a whisper, and I felt my barriers begin to crumble again. I couldn't answer. Everything inside me is mixed up: guilt and desire, duty and passion. I knew that I was on the edge, and any wrong move could ruin everything. We sat in the cafe until it got dark. I knew Jason was coming home soon, and I needed to leave, but I couldn't bring myself to get up. Michael was something forbidden to me, but so attractive. I knew this relationship would ruin my life, but I couldn't help myself. When I finally decided to leave, Michael stopped me at the door. He gently took my hand and whispered, "Emily, you know this isn't the end." I nodded, feeling my insides clench with fear and excitement. I knew this wasn't the end, and that scared me the most. It was late when I got home. Jason was sitting in the living room watching TV. He greeted me with a smile and kissed me on the cheek. "How was your day?" "What is it?" he asked without taking his eyes off the screen. "I'm fine. I'm just tired." I tried to speak as calmly as possible so that he wouldn't notice anything strange. His voice was neutral, but I sensed a slight suspicion in his tone. "Yes, a lot of work," I replied, trying not to meet his eyes. We spent the evening as usual, but the tension did not leave me. I could feel his gaze lingering on me longer than usual, and it made me nervous. It seemed to me that he might suspect something, and I did not know how to behave further. I couldn't sleep for a long time last night. Lying next to Jason, I tried to cope with the storm of emotions that was tearing me apart from the inside. I couldn't get Michael out of my head, but neither could Jason. I loved him, but I couldn't control my feelings for the other one. This double life was becoming unbearable for me, but I didn't know how to get out of it. Things got worse when Jason asked me an unexpected question one day. It was in the evening when we were having dinner together. I noticed that he looked thoughtful, and it immediately alerted me. "Emily," he began carefully, as if weighing every word, "you've been kind of distant lately. Are we all right?" This question hit me like a bolt from the blue. I felt my stomach clench with fear. He felt something, noticed something. But what exactly? "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to sound as innocent as possible. He put his fork down on the table and looked at me. "It's just that you haven't been the same lately. I can feel you moving away. You don't laugh as much as you used to, and we hardly talk." His words were like a knife in my heart. I knew he was right, but I couldn't admit the truth. I loved Jason, but my feelings for Michael were destroying everything I was trying to keep. "Jason, we're fine," I said, trying to smile. "It's just a lot of work, and I'm a little tired." But his gaze was insistent, and I realized that he did not believe my words. "If something's wrong, you can tell me," he added quietly. "I'm here, and I'll always be there." These words made me hold back tears with difficulty. I felt terrible lying to him, but I couldn't tell the truth. Instead, I nodded and muttered, "Thanks, Jason. I know." We finished dinner in silence, and I realized that our trust was beginning to crack at the seams. Jason was too kind and considerate to ignore the changes in our relationship. I knew that everything would only get more complicated from now on. But the scariest thing for me was that I couldn't bring myself to finish this dangerous game. Michael continued to occupy all my thoughts, and every message or look he gave me became a challenge that I could not resist. Every day turned into a masquerade in which I tried to keep everything under control, but everything inside me was collapsing. I didn't know how long I could go on like this, but I knew one thing. This story wasn't over yet. Michael wasn't just a temptation for me. He became a part of my life that I couldn't erase, despite all the consequences. It's been a few months since my affair with Michael began. Time flew by in a blur, and I was balancing between two lives. Every day this masquerade became more difficult. Jason, despite his kindness and understanding, couldn't help but notice how I was moving away. His attention and care became an unbearable burden for me. But the worst thing happened that day, when everything collapsed in one moment. It was an ordinary Friday night. I returned home when Jason was already waiting for me with dinner. I felt especially guilty that day. Michael and I met for lunch, and this meeting left a mark on my heart and mind. I couldn't stop thinking about him, even when I was at home with Jason. We were eating in silence when he suddenly spoke. "Emily, do you mind meeting with my colleagues tomorrow? They want to have dinner, and I thought it would be nice." I froze. Michael was among his colleagues. We had never crossed paths in their presence, and the thought of having to be with both men at once made me nervous. "Of course," I replied, trying to hide my excitement. "Why not?" Jason looked at me, and there was something in his eyes that I couldn't decipher. Maybe it was a suspicion, but I hoped it was just my paranoia. The next day, I was on edge. I dressed in my best dress, tried to look as casual as possible. Inside, I felt like I was on a powder keg. When we arrived at the restaurant, I immediately noticed Michael. He was standing at the bar with Jason's colleagues, smiling and joking as always. When our eyes met, he froze for a second and then slowly smiled at me, as if it was a sign that only the two of us understood. Jason led me to a table where several of his friends were already sitting. I tried to act natural, but every move Michael made me uneasy. Every moment I realized that this evening could end in disaster. The conversations at the table were casual, and I began to relax. But when Jason suddenly raised his glass and said, "I want to make a toast," his voice was quiet, but there was something in it that made me tense up. For honesty and dedication, which are so important in life. I looked at him, trying to figure out what he was talking about. At that moment, I felt uneasy. He was looking straight at me, and his gaze was full of tension. "Jason, what are you?" I started, but he interrupted me. His voice was cold and clear. "I know." At that moment, time seemed to slow down. My heart was pounding faster, and panic began to form in my head. "What do you mean?" I tried to stay calm, but my stomach was clenching with fear. Jason took a deep breath, setting his glass down on the table. "I know about you and Michael," he said, saying it as if the words were coming to him with great difficulty. "I've known what's been going on for months." Michael froze in place, as if he hadn't expected such a turn. Everyone's eyes were fixed on us, and I felt my face start to burn. "Jason, it's not like that." I started, but he stopped me. "Don't, Emily," he said in a tired voice. "I don't want to hear any more lies. I found your messages, saw how you met. Do you think I didn't notice anything? I was just hoping that it wasn't true, that you would come and tell me everything yourself." I felt like the whole world was collapsing around me. My head was in chaos, and I didn't know what to do. Michael sat motionless, his face expressionless, but I knew he was shocked too. "Jason, the word stuck in my throat. I didn't know how to explain, how to justify myself." His voice was low but firm. "You betrayed me. You betrayed us." These words sounded like a sentence. I couldn't look into his eyes, feeling the tears begin to choke me. "I'm leaving," he finally said. "You can stay with Michael if you want, but it's over between us." He got up without looking at me and walked out of the restaurant, leaving me alone among the people who were now looking at me with sympathy and condemnation. Michael tried to say something, but I couldn't hear him. The whole scene blurred before my eyes, and I couldn't breathe. I knew I'd lost Jason forever. Everything I tried to hide has now been revealed. When I was alone, I finally realized what I had done. Michael came up to me and said quietly, "Emily, we need to talk." But I couldn't listen to him anymore. All I have left are the ruins of my life. I got up and left without looking back. This chapter of my life is over. But the future seemed frighteningly unknown.